Okay, folks, if we could get you to start moving back to your seats, please. A hush. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Guy Swan. I'm Vice President at the Association of the U.S. Army, a member of the Aspen Homeland Security Group, and former commander of 5th Army, Army North, one of the components under General Jacoby's headquarters here. Before we start, and as we get to the close of another terrific Aspen Security Forum, I want to add my personal thanks to Clark Irvin, his band of merry men and women, and all the folks at the Aspen Institute for another job well done. And to all of you, the hardcore of the hardcore, sticking it out with us here to the bitter end, I'm very privileged to be able to introduce a session with frankly, my very good friend and longtime colleague, General Chuck Jacoby. This session is going to be very informative, I think, for many of you because the topic of defense, support of civil authorities, and the role of DOD and the military in our homeland is a subject that, frankly, is not well understood, in my view. And I'm also sure that the General will cover his significant homeland defense missions as opposed to the role he plays in homeland security as the first U.S. Army officer to serve as the dual-hatted U.S. NORTHCOM commander and the commander of the joint U.S. Canadian North American Aerospace Defense Command, better known as NORAD. And I learned last night when Admiral Greenert was delayed getting in here, General Jacoby's also an expert on the U.S. Navy and was prepared to step in for the Admiral last night. To moderate the session, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Ken Dilanian from the Associated Press. Ken covers the U.S. intelligence community and has previously worked at USA Today and the Philadelphia Inquirer, where he was based overseas and spent time covering the war in Iraq. Ken is the 2007 winner of the prestigious Casey Medal for Meritorious Journalism for a series he co-authored on negligent deaths in Philadelphia's child welfare system. So with that, Ken, the floor is yours.
Guy, thanks for that introduction, and I too want to thank Clark and his staff for putting on a really special event. I'm a lifer. I've been to all 5 of these, and I find them incredibly valuable. And you know, David Sanger at 11:30 talked about the diehards. These are the real diehards here at 4 o'clock and second to last panel. I am so pleased to be here with my guest, General Charles Jacoby. He is the 5th commander of NORTHCOM and the 22nd commander of NORAD. He assumed his current assignment on August 3rd, 2011, having previously served as the Director for Strategic Plans and Policy on the Joint Staff. Now, his successor at NORTHCOM, Navy Admiral William Gortney, has been nominated by the President and is expected to be confirmed, but hasn't yet. A 1978 graduate of the U.S. Military Academy, General Jacoby has a master's degree in history from the University of Michigan. He was the ground commander in Iraq from March 2009 to March 2010, and the deputy ground commander in Afghanistan in 2004 and 2005. I learned that General Jacoby is the first Army officer to command NORTHCOM and NORAD. And so he's a paratrooper, so he's jumped out of airplanes, but he doesn't fly them. So he's the first non-pilot to hold this job as well. And the father of 3 sons, including one who's a 2013 West Point graduate and is serving. So, General Jacoby, so pleased to have you here. Getting ready for this panel, I learned a lot about NORTHCOM and NORAD. You know, my understanding of NORAD came mainly from the 1983 movie War Games with Matthew Broderick.
Me too.
Until my 8-year-old now knows NORAD as the guys who track Santa.
Right.
But actually, you guys have a really serious homeland defense mission, and maybe you could just start by, because a lot of people don't understand many of the things that you're into. Maybe you could give us a lay of the land and what the mission is.
Yeah, I also want to thank Clark. I'm really humbled to be here with so many serious thinkers about our really complicated security environment. And You know, as the NORAD and the NORTHCOM commander, it struck me over the last 3 years. I spent the first 34 years of my command, or of my career out there, defending America out there. And it occurs to me now that the distinction between the home game and the away game has really changed and maybe less significant than it's been in the past. And so all of these issues that you've discussed today are of interest to the commander responsible for the homeland. And I want you to know tracking Santa is a no-fail mission. So if you want a no-fail mission, lose Santa and see what happens if you're the Army guy. It wasn't going to happen on my watch.
If anyone doesn't know, you can actually call NORAD and ask the location. And General Jacoby told me that he sometimes answers the phone and talks to kids. So. Can you talk a little bit about NORTHCOM's structure? Because I didn't understand this. You have, 1,600 headquarters troops, right? But you may have occasion to need lots of other troops that are based here, but not directly linked to NORTHCOM. How does that work? How do you call upon those troops when you need it?
So the command is really two commands. It's NORAD, which is a binational command. It's very special. We defend the airspace of North America together, a sovereign interest that really we share together. It's quite unique. And we do maritime warning, we do missile warning together. It is an enormous competitive advantage that we do that with our neighbor, Canada. And sometimes we take it for granted, but I can tell you right now that NORAD is more relevant than it's ever been, given the threats that currently face North America. My other hat, so I can swivel the other hat, is NORTHCOM, a geographic combatant commander. My theater of operations is North America, from the Arctic all the way down to the border between Mexico and Guatemala, and includes the Bahamas. And it's a relatively new command, as you described it. It's a post 9/11 creation, and we are evolving the mission set as we discover all the things that are required of the military and the homeland. And it really falls into three groups. The first group is Homeland Defense, which is really the priority. And NORAD fits in the Homeland Defense category, but so does ballistic missile defense, which we're responsible for in the homeland, cruise missile defense, maritime defense, our contribution to cyber defense. And so, that is always job one, to defend the homeland. The second basket of things that are really the topic of the discussion today, defense support to civil authorities. That's a mission set that we've always performed, but I will tell you the first half of my career, we wouldn't have said that defense support to civil authorities was a core military task. It would be something that we would do, and sometimes grudgingly. And after Katrina, what we understood was that the American people have a legitimate expectation that we're going to be there, and that we're going to be effective, that we're going to be on time, and that we're going to deliver at times of our citizens' greatest needs. And so I will tell you, it's a core task for us right now. But it's not just defense support to civil authorities during a hurricane or some kind of natural disaster or man-made disaster. It's also defense support to law enforcement, defense support to some of our partners like DHS, who is also another organization that's a post 9/11 creation, and very rich and very important in what we do. Then the third task is security cooperation. Now, my other combatant commander brothers, make fun of me because I've only got 3 countries, and I have the Bahamas. So, they watch me carefully how many trips I make to the Bahamas. But the reality is the Bahamas, Mexico, and the Arctic are approaches to our homeland. And the security of those countries, they're our neighbors, they're important trading partners, and their security is our security. And so in a very meaningful way, our working with Canada, the Bahamas, and with Mexico is critical for the overall defense of the homeland.
And there's a lot to talk about on Mexico, which we'll get to, but I wanted to just ask on the Homeland Defense disaster response piece, maybe you could walk us through a scenario to illustrate how it works. A dirty bomb goes off in a U.S. city.
Okay.
Or you guys talk about black swan events, right?
Yeah, so you had to pick a dirty bomb in a major city. Okay.
There's a movie about one going off in London that came to mind when I was asking that question.
Right. So The dirty bomb scenario is one that concerns folks, and I know it was discussed earlier. And the best thing to do is to interdict out there. And so it's an intelligence challenge. The first part of it's an intelligence challenge. To that end, because we're the customer of concern for receiving a dirty bomb more than any other concern the country might have would be the impact on the homeland. I really have to stay connected with a large array of partners, Central Intelligence Agency, Department of State, PACOM, UCOM, all the combatant commands. And so we are very tightly nested with them so that we understand threats as they approach the homeland. So intelligence is critical, then interdiction, and so we do maritime warning and maritime defense if required. And then we can provide defense support to law enforcement in certain categories of capabilities for searching or for trying to
Okay,
find.
but that's if one went off, right, and civil order started to break down, at what point do you guys take control of the situation?
Well, I would tell you that we're going to resist taking control unless, blocks are checked and the president makes decisions. I will, most of the time, in either a natural or man-made disaster, we're going to get behind FEMA. FEMA really, post-Katrina FEMA is a brand name, and they are great partners for us. And they will seek to try to get control of the situation. But we have, since 2011, restructured our chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear enterprise, response enterprise. And really that was done with some view to what happened to the Japanese in Fukushima, and really thinking our way through, are we any better prepared to respond to that? So I have about 18,000 soldiers and airmen that are available to me that are specifically trained and equipped to respond in echelon within 24 through 96 hours to a chem-bio-radiological event. So describe the dirty nature of the bomb, and we would be, for the most part, prepared to deal with it.
And what would it take for that to be a federal response as opposed to the state requesting you to come in?
Yeah, well,
a multi-state event?
Yeah, one of the issues would be that I think with a WMD, you'd be hard-pressed not to start with the proposition that it might have been an attack. And so because it might have been an attack, there'll be a different construct, and you could get federal interest in it right away. And then depending on the scope and scale, you might get more federal interest quicker, as opposed to maybe a chem event someplace which was controllable by a state. So we postured the force and are prepared to respond if asked by a state through FEMA to respond, or immediately upon the direction of the president.
So the president can order you into action.
Correct.
And you control the scene or the disaster site.
Right. Well, we'll link up with who's ever on the ground as the incident commander. And if the incident commander has the capacity to run it, it could be anywhere from a local sheriff to an FBI special agent in charge to a FEMA regional officer. So if they've got it, we'll link up with them and we'll support them. If not, we'll establish some kind of support.
Now, in the more common scenario is a natural disaster, and you guys did a lot of work in Hurricane Sandy. Maybe you could talk about the logistical kind of things that you brought to the table.
Yeah. So Sandy was, an interesting problem for us, and I look back on it and I say, we could have expected that a major hurricane smashing into Manhattan was not going to be a borough of Manhattan issue. It was not going to be a state of New York issue. It was going to be a national issue. In fact, it could have been a global issue. And I'll tell you a little story that the first FEMA VTC that we attended, the president came to, and Secretary Geithner was the first one to speak, and we were kind of scratching our head on why that was happening. Treasury Secretary. And he said, Mr. President, if we don't get the equity markets back open by Monday, the national recovery is at risk. Okay, that kind of changes everything. So now, what is normally not your top priority, hurricane response, is now the nation's #1 priority. And of course, we were also 3 days away from the election. So the president was looking for making an impact and leading and supporting the governors and the mayors, and so that's NORTHCOM's job. And the trick to that is one of my principal responsibilities is to allow the president to make a difference, to execute his responsibilities, and to lead, but also to be mindful of the authorities and the responsibilities of governors and mayors. And so that's the balancing act that we do, and that's what we did in Sandy. And I think I was talking to Frank Grass, who is the chief of the National Guard Bureau, and we worked very closely together on Sandy. And so we asked each other, well, how do you think we did? And Frank said, well, we haven't been called to testify yet. And so as a measure of effectiveness, right?
So
that's not bad.
Didn't you have some big pumps that nobody else had,
Right.
and you delivered some gasoline? That's the kind of...
So what we have to be prepared to do is bring industrial strength response to the problem. That's what we can do. But it's not worth it if it's not on time. It's not worth it. It's got to be on time. It has to be effective. And that means we have to prepare. That means we have to lean forward without leaning into and without crowding. It's a little bit of a balancing act. But we provided most of the giant pumps that had to deal with the subways and the tunnels. We provided support from the sea with a Marine Expeditionary Unit from an aircraft carrier and a couple other support ships to restore capabilities along the harbor and get ships back in and out, work closely with the Coast Guard. So some niche capabilities. We also used Air Force C-17s to fly 200-some power trucks from California and Washington to restore power in the New York area. So industrial.
Yeah. So the GAO, as they are wont to do, had some criticism of the effort.
No.
There was a report.
Tell me that's not true.
This is how they characterized it.
They didn't ask me. I want you to know. They never checked with me.
DOD has not developed a construct for the command and control of federal military forces during complex catastrophes. And they went on to say that the after-action reports from Sandy said there was confusion about who was in charge. What can you say about that?
Well, I can say that I had no confusion about who my boss was. And the adjutants general of New York and New Jersey weren't confused on who their bosses were. I think that is I'm not happy with that remark. I think that we employed what we call a dual status commander, where I've got a National Guard general that is authorized and trained to use both federal and state troops, and we employed them in both New York and in New Jersey. Can we do better? Absolutely. But one of the things you got to remember about a catastrophe and a disaster is that there's a reason we use the word catastrophe and a disaster. I mean, it was a significant event, and sorting through who's on the net, who's working, who's up, and how to respond and what the requirements are, a difficult challenge. I would say in the main that the command and control was the biggest difference from what happened in Sandy. So,
You mean from Katrina?
I'm sorry, yeah, Katrina.
Right, okay. Great, let's turn to cyber.
Okay.
You told me that part of your responsibility is to be aware of and have an understanding of the parade of horribles that could happen in terms of a cyber attack in the U.S. So, I mean, Rick Leggett from the NSA was here and mentioned, this wasn't a new piece of information, but that nation states have inserted malware into the power grid, for example. So how vulnerable is the power grid? And have you gamed out, how NORTHCOM responds if there's a major power?
Yeah, let me tell you what our responsibilities are. So first of all, I've got the responsibility to defend the systems that we use to get our mission done. And that's principally, most importantly, the NORAD systems. And then we still retain national leadership responsibilities, command and control responsibilities, and we still use Cheyenne Mountain for that. And so those are systems that have to be protected. Those are non-negotiable, cannot be penetrated. They are, critical. And so that's our first responsibility, is to ensure that our systems can't be breached. The third responsibility, or the second responsibility, is we need to be able to respond to the consequences of a large cyber attack, just as if it was Sandy or another type of catastrophe. And so, when we do a lot of modeling, we do modeling with FEMA, with DITRA and others to try to understand what could a cyber attack could look like.
Models. Scare the audience, please. This whole conference, the theme running through this, or many of the
scare the
panels,
conference?
has been, cyber is we're in a pre-9/11 moment. Some panelists have said on cyber. So.
Yeah, so, you worry about the transportation grid on the East Coast going down, or the power grid in California or on the West Coast going down. And it's not just what would happen to defense critical infrastructure, but what would happen to, millions of folks in the 2.6 million in the LA basin if power went out. And so those are real concerns, and we have to be able to address those with that industrial strength Department of Defense support. But we also have this challenge that we're working with NSA or with Cybercom on, is it a Homeland Defense task or is it a Defense Support to Civil Authorities task to go get that malware and get it off? And so we haven't decided that yet. And that goes back to this question about where is our biggest vulnerability? Is it the capability of our keystrokers? I don't know. They're pretty damn good. Or is it our laws and policies that help clarify, who's got what part of this battle space and the authorities necessary to act on it? Right, that's a work in progress.
When Legit said, nation states put malware on the power grid, my next question was, well, are we getting it off? Do we have a handle on it? And you're saying you don't really have the authority to do that.
That's not my mission set right now. But I will tell you, somebody needs to do that. And I don't think that it's as clear who does that and how they do it as it should be.
Right. Okay. So Mexico, NORTHCOM oversees U.S. military contacts with Mexico. There have been reports that the military is providing spy planes, drones, SIGINT equipment as part of the effort to fight the cartels, and that a lot of that was happening under the Calderon government, and then question was, would it continue under the new government? Right. Has it continued? What's the relationship been like?
Well, first of all, my relationship with Mexico really started. I was a one-star in the Pentagon at just before 2001, and I tried to get an appointment down in Mexico to see my counterpart. Couldn't happen. Wouldn't happen. There has been no mill-to-mill relationship with Mexico in the past, and it hasn't been beneficial to either country in the past. In about 2006, there was a watershed event, and President Calderon was forced to put his military on the street to deal with an epidemic of violence that's cartel-inspired down there. And their military, I think, made a courageous decision and turned to us and asked for assistance and asked for cooperation and asked for teaming and working together. And so the things that they've asked us to do, when we've been given the authority to do them, we're happy to support them. And like many, we wondered, with the change of administration, with the military-to-military relationship that was growing, and it's like any relationship, there were fits and starts, and it was building trust and transactional and taking risk. And it was growing, and we wanted it to continue. And the question was, will it continue? And the answer is clear right now that not only has it continued, but it's continued to grow. We trained with over 5,000 Mexican soldiers this year. Mexico just put the first down payment on 18 Black Hawk helicopters using the foreign military sales with the United States methodology, which is an enormous sea change for how we've done business with Mexico in the past.
The fact that they were willing to go through the foreign military sales
Absolutely.
system.
It means developing a trusted relationship with the United States Army for 2 decades. And so it was a big deal, and it's the front end of about a $1.8 billion deal. So the answer is yes, it's continuing. Some things are different. Some things are growing faster than others. We had one of the speakers talk about the Mexican southern border strategy. We've had Mexican military officials come to us, ask us, well, can we collaborate on that as they think through how to go about that? We're absolutely willing to do that and eager to do that. And so I'm very optimistic. And I will also say that, kind of debunking what some folks thought, Peña Nieto has also, under his leadership, removed the #1 leader of the Gulf cartel, removed the #1 leader of the Sinaloa cartel, and removed the #1 leader of the Zeta cartel. So I see a continued strong partnership with Mexico.
Is it fair to say that all of those operations were conducted with U.S. assistance?
No, I don't think it is fair to say. But I think it's fair to say that U.S. mil-to-mil relationship, what we've learned together, what we've done together, what we've cooperated on, has helped the Mexican military modernize and become more effective at all of the tasks that they've set out for themselves.
But so how does it work in practice? I mean, does U.S. aircraft fly over Mexico, and is U.S. signals intelligence equipment on Mexican soil with American operators, or is it given to Mexico?
Now, I know you threw that out there, and you're not hooking me on that one.
Can't talk about that one?
Well, we don't talk about ongoing operational issues and to the extent to which and the nature of the exact cooperation. But it is fair to say, just as President Calderon said in 2006, they said, they asked for, they wanted, and we do have an intelligence relationship with them.
Now, I know you have some interesting things to say about how to go after the cartels, but I wanted to ask about the drug war.
Right.
I mean, so it's no secret that a growing number of people from both sides of the political spectrum, question U.S. drug enforcement policy on the supply side in particular. I was just looking around, and in October, a study in the British Medical Journal found that over the last 20 years, the supply and potency of illegal drugs has increased while the prices have fallen, even though law enforcement seizures have increased. And so one of the authors said, hey, this adds to the growing body of evidence that the drug war has failed. You've been fighting this war. What would you like to say about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, the seizure and interdiction issue, those aren't reliable metrics for us anymore. We don't know what the denominator is of what's coming into the country. And we don't know what it is because we have, vulnerabilities to these organizations that are able to get things into our country. And so, being here in Colorado, we all understand there's a political dimension to the drug discussion. And there is across the country right now. And so what I've tried to talk about is not the product, but the organizations. So if you're not worried about the drugs and the 40,000 dead Americans and what it does to our youth, if you don't worry about that, then worry about an organization that is so ruthless, so violent, so powerful, that with our third largest trading partner, Mexico, can gain freedom of movement on our southern border for illicit distribution of things from guns to cash to unaccompanied children. So, if you don't want to talk about the drug issue, or if you want to chalk that up or move that into another category, talk about these organizations that have undermined and threatened the governance of our partners throughout Central America and the Caribbean.
In other words,
and
if
in
we
Mexico.
legalize drugs tomorrow, the cartels would still be there and they would find another product.
That's exactly what they did with the unaccompanied children. That's
Right.
just
We're gonna talk about
another product to exploit.
So should we be using the counterterrorism playbook to go after the cartels?
Well, it's a good question, and you have to be careful when you say that, because you don't want to imply that there's some kind of transference of somehow this is an Iraq problem repackaged in the Western Hemisphere. That's not what it is. But it is a network, and it's a complex network, and they are interconnected criminal organization networks. And I personally believe there's plenty of evidence of a conversion between terrorist and criminal organizations and networks. And we have learned that the best way to fight a network is with a network. And so counter-network tactics, techniques, procedures, collection, I believe are called for in effective dealing with cartels and other criminal organizations.
And can you give one or two examples of what we would be doing differently that we're not doing now? In that
Sure. So has everybody heard of the transit zone, the arrival zone, and the source zone? I mean, that's our convenient division of the drug war. The source zone is where it's grown. Transit zone is or the go-fast boats, and then the arrival zone are our kids in the little shop next to my son's high school in Colorado Springs. And so we've conveniently segmented it, and we said we're going to pay all of our attention to the transit zone, which for the most part, that's where the Department of Defense has been asked to help. And as I said before, we don't know what the denominator is, so we have no idea really what effect we're having on the network. And so check the numbers. I mean, the cartels are more powerful, they're more globally interconnected, they're making more money, and they're more violent than they ever have been. And so I don't see that effect being had. So we know how to take a network apart. We know what the access targets are. We know financiers, logisticians, operators, not just leaders, have to have pressure put on them. The fear calculus is completely wrong, okay? It's the Mexican people, it's the moms and dads in Honduras who are afraid, not the criminals. Okay, we got to flip that.
But you're not talking about U.S. military operations on Mexican soil. So how does that work?
No, but we can cooperate. We can cooperate in intelligence, and we can cooperate amongst ourselves. So remember I said the best way to attack a network is with a network. So we need to check ourselves. We need to check. So, this is military talk. So the bad guys are red and the good guys are blue. So Red Network is working well together. They have all these places where they cooperate and they interact, and they're very strong and they're very violent and they're global. The Blue Network, maybe not as good as it could be. How is our cooperation between law enforcement and intelligence community? I mean, the cooperation, the level of cooperation we've seen in Kandahar and in Kaust and in, Balad, it's not the same in the United States.
We don't have that. That's very interesting. We could talk more about that, but there's also the humanitarian crisis playing out on the southern border with the unaccompanied minors. And I know you guys sent an assessment team, is that right?
Right.
Down there to figure out what NORTHCOM's role is going to be. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
So I have an organization, it's called Joint Task Force North. It's been around a long time. And it operates out of Fort Bliss, Texas. And its mission is to provide Defense Department support to law enforcement on the southwest border. And so we operate under 1004 Counter Narcotics Authority to provide a little bit of support on the southwest border during the year. Mostly things like assisting in surveillance, assisting in road building and those kinds of things to help agents do their job better. And so it wasn't odd for them, for the department or the secretary to ask me, okay, link up with your partners, CBP, ICE, the other folks in DHS, find out if there are some things that you can do additional to what you already do to support them that's particularly related to the unaccompanied children problem. And so I had a group go down there. They met with their partners, and I owe the secretary a report on the 8th of August to let them know what are some of the tasks that we might do to help them.
And what's your view of what's driving this situation and what should be done?
Yeah. So the department has a mission with this, and that's that unaccompanied children that we can get off the border. We've overwhelmed DHHS's ability to house them as we look for solutions to where they head to. They've selected some military posts to house the kids. So that's our first mission, and our mission is to take care of kids. And DHHS is still the lead in running the facilities, but we have a moral obligation to provide the support we can to make sure those kids are treated right. And we're doing that, and I'm very proud of that. But that's not the problem, and that's not the story. The story is really three parts. There's a push that's coming from Central America, primarily. And that push, something has happened that's changed the calculus, the risk calculus that parents are taking. I served for over a year in Honduras. And, wonderful people, they feel exactly the same way we do about our families. But they're putting those kids at risk and putting them on the road. So there's a push. Something's going on down there. And I believe it's the violence, it's the erosion of governance and law enforcement capability, and the loss of hope in those countries. And then there's a pull, which is the narrative of any confusion there is about, what's your opportunity in America? What are the policies and things that are being, if there's confusion, that's that's pulling them. And then there's a distribution network that is willing to exploit them every step of the way through El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, and dropping them off on our border. And that's that network.
Yeah.
And to a great extent, especially the last tactical mile, it's the same network that's given you the drugs crossing and the cash crossing and the arms crossing, and maybe that dirty bomb someday.
Now, Admiral Gordney, during his confirmation hearing, was asked by Senator McCaskill, isn't it true that the cartels are backing the smugglers who are taking these kids through Mexico, and the Mexican military isn't doing that much about it? I mean, how could they're transiting through the entire country unmolested. Right. What can we do to get the Mexican military or the law enforcement to take action? Yeah,
so that's a great question, and I will tell you, first of all, the laws are very similar between the three countries of North America, and that is that there are not laws that empower the militaries of any of those three countries to conduct law enforcement operations. And so the Mexican military, just like the U.S. military, just like the Canadian military, are very uncomfortable taking on law enforcement tasks. But I will tell you that the law enforcement in Mexico needs work. And they absolutely need to continue to grow, and President Peña Nieto's got a program to do that. But it is infinitely harder to build a effective police force than it is effective military force, and we've learned that. I would say, though, that the Mexican military is hugely involved in counter-network fighting in Michoacan and in Tamaulipas. And when people say they're not doing anything, I'll take you back to what I said before. The leader of the Zetas, gone. The leader of the Sinaloa, gone. The leader of the Gulf, gone. They are doing something.
And will that make a difference? I mean, don't those guys just get replaced? Tell us the impact.
It's a start. It's a start. It's the same issue we wrestle with. And if you only put pressure one place, then that's not going to do it. And you're right, there's an upward mobility. In fact, it's worse in a criminal organization than it is in a terrorist organization, because it doesn't require somebody that's got their ideological jihad card from someplace. I mean, it's just the next most ruthless guy in the organization steps up. So it is necessary, but not sufficient.
Right. Okay. I want to change gears because there's so much that's under your purview, and talk about missile defense.
Sure.
So I used to write for the Los Angeles Times, and my old newspaper published an investigative story recently, and I want to read a little bit from and get you to respond.
It's the same guy, the GAO report?
They
work together?
Maybe so.
Okay.
The ground-based mid-course defense system, and just to explain, so the Missile Defense Agency builds this stuff, and you pull the trigger, right?
I pull the trigger.
Okay. Ground-based mid-course defense system, the LA Times wrote, was supposed to protect Americans against a chilling new threat from rogue states such as North Korea and Iran. But a decade after it was declared operational, and after $40 billion in spending, the missile shield cannot be relied on, even in carefully scripted tests that are much less challenging than an actual attack would be. The Missile Defense Agency has conducted 16 tests of the system's ability to intercept a mock enemy warhead, and it has failed in 8 of them, government records show. Now then, subsequent to this article, there was a success, right? So, but
when was that written?
A couple of months ago, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I would say that, as the combatant commander, I'm the guy responsible for the hit or the miss. And so I've been insistent in my testimony that we get back to testing. So we had not been testing for quite a while. It's been years. In between testings, and for a lot of reasons.
Maybe we should explain to people what this system is designed, where it is, and what it's designed to hit.
Yeah. So it's called a limited defense system, and it's limited because it's really focused on countries like North Korea, countries like Iran, if they were to acquire missile and warhead technologies. And so what it allows the people of the United States and the president to do is to be able to defend against a state that can threaten the country, certainly not overwhelm the country, certainly not be in the same deterrent relationship that we have with a modern state like Russia or China. And so the first part of this missile defense system was very much focused on North Korea. with most of our interceptors in Alaska and a handful of them in California, and a sensor system arrayed in such a way to help us detect and monitor, track, and then engage. And so a lot of effort went into it. And we've been insisting for the last 3 years that I've been in command that we get back to testing, and we did get back to testing. And what we found was that relatively old technology that was put in the hole a while back needs to be tested and needs to be upgraded. And so I think we've come a long ways in just a couple of years. And what was the impetus? Well, the impetus was Kim Jong-un has demonstrated that what we thought was really, a lot of people felt like, well, that's really a theoretical threat. A North Korean nuclear missile, that's theoretical. But when they put an object up into space and demonstrated all of the technology required to do an ICBM effectively, and they've paraded ICBMs around for their little parades that they have. We know that they've tested nuclear weapons. Now I, as the warfighter, the guy that's responsible, I've got to consider that a practical threat. So everybody else can argue about, well, they've only got a 10% chance or 15%. Not me. So you're looking at me, and I'm supposed to tell the president, I can knock this down. So we've really been fussing for the testing. We got the testing started again. We've made some fixes to the old technology. We saw the fixes show themselves. And that wasn't a scripted test. That was a very difficult long-range test that we just did last month against a missile that incorporated decoys. And so that is PhD work. And I will also tell you that it's not just this missile system. The problem we have is the narrative that you really can't hit a bullet with a bullet. Well, yeah, you can hit a bullet with a bullet. We do it all over the world. The Israelis do it every day, are doing it every day right now. We do it with our Aegis, with our THAAD, with Iron Dome, and so it is proven technology. We owe the American people the effect that was promised, and I think that, and with the bipartisan budget agreement, we bought back some of that. So we bought back a new EKV, we bought back a new missile, and we bought back some new radars, and hopefully we'll get out of the Budget Control Act and be able to sustain it.
So you're confident that this system will knock down a North Korean missile fired at the U.S.?
At the current capability of the North Koreans, I think so.
Okay.
But they aren't going to sit still.
Right.
And we cannot sit still either. And Iran has put objects into space. Iran continues to develop its own ICBM. And I'm coin flipping on the warhead.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we're in the 5+1 talks, and we're all hopeful.
Oh, on the nuclear. Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're also responsible for protecting American airspace from
Yep.
hijacked aircraft, errant
Right.
aircraft. It's called Operation Noble Eagle, right?
Right.
And you guys told me there have been 5,000 incidents since 9/11. That was surprising to me. And one just yesterday. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that mission and then what happened yesterday as an example of what you're dealing with.
Okay, so I've been the NORTHCOM and the NORAD commander for 3 years, so I'm completely paranoid right now, right? So, and not just about losing Santa. Look, after 9/11, the Department of Defense and NORAD made a commitment we weren't going to let that happen again. Okay, we were not going to let the American people and the Canadian people be subject to attack from the air. And there is no better weapon for a terrorist than a 767 full of gas, okay? Now, with our partners, TSA, FAA, FBI, NCTC, we've made it really hard to use that weapon. And it's our job to ensure that in the final analysis, everybody understands that the president will always have an option to shoot down a terrorist hijacked airline, or to make sure that a plane loaded with a bomb is not going to be allowed to land in a highly populated area and blow itself up.
And those lines of authority are very clear now.
They're very clear. And there's a well-rehearsed, in fact, I haven't done this much training since I was a lieutenant. I mean, we train all the time to make sure that we're capable of doing that. And there are a lot of people that want to ease down, let down, but we still have, just last night we had a bomb threat on an aircraft from Toronto over West Virginia, and we put F-16s up, and the mission was inspect. And so there was a bomb threat on the airplane. Because we're NORAD, American F-16s are absolutely free to escort into Canadian airspace. That's what's so remarkable about that relationship. The Canadian fighters couldn't get there in time. We were able to do the escort to make sure that if it was a bomb, that it would land where we told it to land, and that we would ensure that people safely got home. But we're committed to providing or meeting the expectations of the American people. We're not going to let that happen again. I have real problems with drones. I have real problems with general aviation, and we're continuing to work on that.
So your view is drones should not be flying in U.S. airspace?
No, I'm really worried about FedEx drones. I guess I shouldn't have said that. Okay. No, so I'm worried about a drone that shows up with a package this big on it in University of Michigan Stadium on a Saturday.
Right.
Okay, so what do you do about that? So we got to think our way through that, because that's where we're headed. Somebody's going to build one of those things in their garage.
And do you shoot it down, or is it harmless?
Right.
That's your question.
Yep.
All right, well, let's throw it out to questions from the audience. We've got a few minutes left. Over there, Guy.
Oh, no.
Uh-oh.
He's a ringer.
A ringer, yeah. General, I'd just like to get your assessment of a theory. We've talked a lot about the unaccompanied minor situation and why violence has grown in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, generating this. My assessment is it may be a product of the success that you talked about in Mexico against the cartels, much like our success against the Miami Vice cocaine cowboys in the 80s and 90s that drove all of the transit zone into Mexico and empowered the Sinaloa and all the other guys. Is this situation a product of our success in Mexico going after those cartels, forcing those criminal elements into Central America and making it more violent than it's ever been?
Yeah, Guy, that's a great way to look at it. I mean, there is some success there. So if you want to put a smiley face on it, that's what I would do. But I also think it's part of our failure. It's our failure to look at this problem in one dimension, a transit zone issue. So we're going to press here, and it's going to pop over there. And then we'll press here, and it'll pop over there. And so we got to stop looking at this geographically. We need to look at these organizations. We can also talk about what about our success or lack of success with supporting our partners in Central America with development of lawful institutions and police forces and those kinds of things. Because the reason they're there is because of the violence, the wealth, the ruthlessness of those organizations have made it impossible for judges to judge, for jailers to keep people in jail, and for cops to do their job.
You know, there's one thing I want to ask you about that we didn't get to, which is you said something really interesting to me earlier today, which is that you can't envision a future conflict involving the U.S. where the homeland would be a sanctuary from attack the way it has been for most of our history. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, it absolutely, I just can't see a major conflict where action we've decided to take, military action we've decided to take overseas, could not create a reflection back into the homeland.
Through cyber?
Through changing the narrative on the internet for homegrown violent extremists, to terrorist attacks, to unattributable things that happen to our stuff in space. I mean, I just can't see that happening. And I will tell you that we went to general quarters when we were contemplating a strike in Syria, that something would be reflected back. And a lot of these are relatively new technologies and the abilities to reach and touch the homeland since 2010, 2011.
Okay, other questions? Right here, sir.
I'm Nick Christensen, Executive Officer of the Larimer County, Colorado Sheriff's Office, and also serve as a liaison to our State Fusion Center here in Colorado. A couple of quick questions, if I may, and first a quick thank you, too. We've been, as you know, prone to fires and floods here, and The relationship with your command has been excellent. We appreciate the C-130s, the Chinooks, Blackhawks, and the support staff, military police for roadblocks, et cetera. So thank you for that. Along those lines, we work under the National Incident Management System and Incident Command System. To what extent is that working, and to what extent can that be better? And then lastly, to what extent is your command working with state fusion centers? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in state fusion centers, and I think one of the things that we need to do better is how do we get intelligence products down in the state fusion centers, because not all are created equal, and trying to find one with a JWICS in it is pretty tough, and that's the kind of information you need. So I would say that across the board, and I'm glad you asked this question so I could say this. I'm a Fed, okay? I've been a regular Army officer for almost 37 years, and so I've thought about defending the country, over there, as I mentioned. And my last assignment in D.C., you get the impression in D.C. that you think after time, how can the country exist without our guidance? How can they live out there? But every day now for 3 years, I've been looking at the situation report of America. I wake up and I read what's happening in America. There's stuff happening everywhere, train derailments and chemical spills and shootouts at malls and all. 99%, larger than that, are being handled by governors, by mayors, by sheriffs, by chiefs of police, and they're happy to do that. We have these rich communities out there that, as a career soldier, I kind of missed. I missed that. I think that you guys are doing a great job, and I think we ought to do what we can to reinforce it.
In the back there, Kevin.
Thank you. Hi, General. Kevin Barron from Defense One. I want to get your thoughts on Iraq from what you see things now. Two things. What's your explanation for why the Iraq Army collapsed the way it did? And secondly, what do you tell Iraq veterans who see what's going on today after all the fight that they put in under your command?
What do you tell Iraq veterans who sacrificed about what you're seeing?
Yeah, first of all, I want you to know that Lloyd Austin is a friend of mine. He's about 6'5", and he will pound huge knots in my forehead if I answer questions that are really his. So, but I will tell you from a personal experience that that the election of 2010 was really a defining moment for America, not the American military, for America in Iraq. And it was my privilege to be the Corps commander in Iraq at that time. And we saw the Sunnis vote over 60% turnout and the Kurds over 70% turnout. And we saw a rich debate every night on Iraqi TV about local issues and about democracy. And so I believe we saw, despite al-Qaeda's weak attempts, it was all out, but weak attempts to stop it, we saw a great thirst for democracy. And so I think that all service members, but all Americans should take a lot of pride in what we accomplished in Iraq. I'm with the ambassador, Negroponte. I'm distressed by it. Of course I'm distressed about it. But I don't think it's over, and I don't think it's irretrievable. And one of the reasons I don't think so is because of my experience in Iraq and watching that thirst of the Iraqi people to give it a try and to take a leap of faith, to take a risk on that way to govern themselves. And the second thing is I've also seen what the extremists eventually reveal, which is who they are and what they do. And the Iraqis really have no interest in that. And so anybody that saw the awakening or the results of the awakening knows that Baghdadi and his message will not sit and will not stay.
But why do you think the Army collapsed, or parts of it, so quickly?
Yeah, I think that ISIL demonstrated the ability to gain and control terrain, and I think that came as a real surprise, and I think they can recover. But I also will tell you, I think they're still under pressure. The same divisions that are in Iraqi society are in Iraqi military. Militaries are always a reflection of their society, and Maliki was not George Washington.
Other questions? Right there, sir.
Thank you very much. Al Cannon from Charleston, South Carolina. I'm one of those local sheriffs. As a quick aside, a week or so ago, the FBI arrested 3 cartel members and recovered a kidnap victim just outside of Columbia, South Carolina. Not Columbia, South America. So it is a troubling element and issue to us. But to switch gears quickly, one of the growing genres of books in Barnes & Noble and others is the survivalist and prepper genre. And one of the recurring themes is EMP. And just wanted to ask you, to what extent is that a threat, and to what extent are we addressing that? Thank you.
Yeah, EMP is it's a reality. It's a problem. It's electromagnetic pulse. If somebody blows up a nuclear weapon, it fries your electronics, and it depends on what altitude, what the dispersion is, and so it's a problem. So the first thing to do is intelligence, and make sure that we don't let one of those weapons get on our shore, or that the NORTHCOM commander effectively shoots one down before it can be detonated above our cities. And then we've got to think our way through, because it's great expense to protect systems from electromagnetic pulse. That's why we've kept Cheyenne Mountain open. It's one of the few places that we were able to achieve that. And so we have to be very careful, but we need to selectively make sure we've hardened critical infrastructure that the nation relies on against EMP. But I would not, it's something very difficult for the individual citizen to do something about. It's on others.
You see the threat intelligence on a daily basis, right? You
Yes.
see some of the most secret intelligence about threats to the homeland. Tell us, is a terrorist attack on the homeland because of Syria or some of the things we've been hearing about at this conference more likely this year than last year and the year before, in your view?
Yeah, I think, in the Al-Qaeda, so you guys have received this massive amount of information from, highly qualified experts. But, we watch Syria and Iraq exclusively because of the Al-Qaeda threat, because they have not given up their intentions on the far enemy, and that's us. Nor have the manifestations of the Al-Qaeda organization in the Maghreb and in the Arabian Peninsula. They have retained that as a target. And so we've made great progress against core Al-Qaeda, but the organization has continued to adapt. And so we are vigilant, and we are concerned, and our standard is 0.
Can you say whether you think it's more likely because of what we've been hearing about?
We're more concerned than we were last year because of Syria and Iraq.
All right, let's get one last question. Ma'am, right here. You in the dress. There we go. That's all right.
That narrowed it down.
Sure, sorry.
Hi, Nikki Sutton, NCTC. First, sir, I'd love to thank you just for the ongoing, consistent, and wonderful cooperation we see from NORAD and US NORTHCOM with NCTC. We consider you guys a great partner, so thank you for that. Secondly, I was hoping you could comment a little bit on the relatively young and relatively recent stand-up of SOC North and how you see their role in their mission, particularly with regard to the discussions we've been having about Mexico and cartels and the current human smuggling crisis there.
Right. Very you. That was with 1 minute to go. With 1 minute to go, I got the SOC North question. Every combatant commander has a special ops command, and NORTHCOM did not. So last year we stood up Special Ops Command North. We do a lot of we take advantage of special operations capabilities in the homeland. We do it all the time. They are the most effective of our partnering forces for small unit kinds of things. And so Mexico has a great appetite for doing things with SOC North, and so does some of the law enforcement folks. And we've never really had the capacity to answer the mail on that, so they've had to go to other places to get that kind of DOD assistance. And so I think it's just a normal progression, part of growing up as a command. And I think it's really going to be beneficial to our partners.
All righty, we're going to wrap it up. General Jacoby, thank you. Thanks for your service.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Good job.
Thanks. No, that was great. Thanks for keeping me on track.